to participate to this meeting, so we appreciate if you can start. Good afternoon. I hope that you enjoyed your lunch and you're ready for the afternoon session. So the afternoon session will be focusing on regulation for connecting the unconnected in the IGAD region. As we have discussed this morning, as we celebrate that 40% of Africans, 20% of Ethiopians, and 40% of Kenyans are connected, there are unfortunately the majority of Africans that are still not connected. And we need to see how we can connect them, because we don't want them to lose the opportunities that all of us in this room have. So one way of connecting the unconnected is by putting in place the regulation that will connect them as quickly as possible. Therefore, we are going to discuss various strategies, various experiences in the region, and see how we can learn from each other. To moderate this session, we have invited someone who has been helping us for a long time. He was very supportive, especially in the first Internet Development Conference. That's Robel Kitaba. He's a network engineer, tech lead from Meta initially. And Robel brings over 17 years of experience in telecom and global internet infrastructure, specializing in the design, deployment, and operation of some of the largest networks in the world. He has served as a network engineer, tech lead at Meta, and Amazon's AWS global networking team. Previously, he worked as a design and support network engineer for ZTE in Ethiopia during the implementation of the Ethio Telecom's NGN infrastructure in the 2007 and 2008. Robel is passionate about advancing Africa's internet infrastructure technology, particularly in East Africa, and actively collaborates with various stakeholders in the region, including Internet Society. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Duarte, for the introduction. All right, so in today's session, as Dr. Duarte mentioned, we will delve into the critical role of the internet regulation in achieving affordable and widespread internet access across the IGAD region. We will also explore examples and experiences from Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, and also from Brazil. Additionally, we will also highlight recommended regulatory frameworks and policies to further expand equitable internet connectivity in these countries. So this session will be divided into two parts. The first part will be into a presentation, which will go around 75 minutes. Let's see how that will fare, because we started in a delayed time. And then the second part is a Q&A panel which would actually take questions from you, as well as from predetermined some warm-up questions. There will be breaks, especially a 10-minute breaks between these two parts. So, please stay tuned. So without further ado, let's move to the first presentation by Ms. Mavis Maunganidze. I apologize for ruining your last name, who is a program officer in ITU Regional Office. Ms. Mavis, an ICT professional with 20 years of experience in policy, regulation, and digital transformation, is a program officer at ITU Africa, supporting regional ICT initiatives. She previously led universal access projects at POTRAS, enhancing services in underserved areas. An active member of ISOC Zimbabwe, IEEE, and the Zimbabwe Institute of Engineers. Mavis holds degrees in electronic engineering, renewable energy, and IT law. She advocates for ICT as a tool for community empowerment and gender equality. Please welcome Ms. Mavis to the stage.
Okay, thank you very much, Robel. Good afternoon, colleagues. All protocol observed. Like has been introduced, my name is Mavis Maunganidze. I'm with the ITU Regional Office for Africa. Today, I'll try to take you through regulation for connecting the unconnected in the ICAD region. I'm just happy that in the morning, first session, we managed to address some of the pertinent questions to do with connectivity and related issues. Even though there was a question to say which should come first, we all know that connectivity remains an important gateway into the digital ecosystem for everyone. I'm sure all of us, the moment we arrived here, we were looking for the Wi-Fi password. That just shows us the importance of connectivity. Thank you. So I'll go into my presentation. To start with, I just gave a brief background of the regulatory landscape in the operator. And then we also have, in terms of some of the summaries, it is quite disheartening to note that in terms of some of the sub-regions within the African continent, we remain one of the sub-regions with the lowest ICT indicators in terms of connectivity and mobile broadband penetration. We have on one end, Kenya, which has very good ICT indicators, and in between countries maybe like Somalia, Uganda, and the likes, and we have some who are lagging behind a lot. And I'm sure the reasons why this is happening is, there are various reasons. So as you can see, we have a map there which shows fiber connectivity through the region. That is the submarine cables and the different points where they connect in the region. And those points are very critical to the region because they are bringing internet to us, or they bring connectivity with the rest of the world because they are the international gateways. So in terms of the undersea cable landing ports, we have them indicated there. I'm not sure whether in terms of the capacity, it's still the same. This could have changed between when the documentation that I referred to was written and now, but generally that gives us a picture of how it is like. And then in terms of the remaining countries in the region, they access their internet through the other countries through terrestrial fiber, and some I've seen that it's through satellite. But in terms of the terrestrial fiber links, they're highlighted there for Ethiopia, South Sudan, and lastly, we have connection through Kenya and Tanzania for in the ports, that is Mombasa and Dar es Salaam, which provides connectivity to the landlocked countries. But we find that even though we have this connectivity to landlocked countries, we still have a high cost of connectivity in those landlocked countries. So what it means is, as a region, we need to come together to come up with strategies that will allow us to reduce the cost to the landlocked countries and also to those countries which already have seaports. And then in terms of regional exchange points, these are also important in terms of connectivity. I noted that we have 3 major ones in the regions, which are actually enabling exchange of traffic within the region, within certain countries. But we don't have one which is overall for the IGAD region. And then in terms of our major challenges as a region, we have faced the infrastructure challenge. There is inadequate ICT infrastructure, which makes it very difficult for everyone to be connected, limited broadband coverage, insufficient power supply. Power remains one of the most important issues, which is critical to the spread of ICT infrastructure. And then there's also the issue of the terrain itself. And then in terms of rural areas, I think this is an issue across all of Africa where we have dispersed populations such that to connect rural populations at times it becomes very expensive and uneconomic for private sector players or even for government players. And then we have regulatory barriers, like has been indicated, with complex licensing procedures, and then we don't have a policy harmonization as a region. So at the moment, most of the issues, each country is moving at its own pace and with its own policy frameworks. And you also find that in terms of regional regulatory integration, in terms of ICT, we don't have one regional body that is bringing coherence to the whole industry. We have some of the member states belonging to IACO. Some of the member states, they also belong to COMESA, which also has an ICT arm, which is helping in shaping policy. But overall, everyone, I think, is a member of the ITU, where we also have a lot of benchmarking policies and regulations which can be used. And then we also have economic constraints. So the next question is to say, what has the region done? The region has 2 major initiatives which I've seen, which are aimed at increasing access to ICT infrastructure and connectivity, which is the Eastern Africa Regional Digital Integration Project and the IGAD Regional Infrastructure Master Plan. So both of these plans, over and above all the other different infrastructure which they touch on, they also touch on the issue of ICT connectivity and regional connectivity and integration. So this is very critical, and I believe that if these 2 plans are implemented, they could have a huge impact in terms of regional connectivity and integration at large. So in terms of the policy frameworks within the region, those are some of the similarities between countries and the differences. We find that most of the countries have established some regulatory bodies to oversee the ICT sector, and there is a common focus on improving connectivity, data protection, and cybersecurity. And then there are efforts towards liberalization and competition, of which you find that competition plays a huge role in terms of ensuring that connectivity is widespread, because once you have competitors who start moving out of the major cities to go and look for new customers in other areas that previously we wouldn't consider. And then there are some differences in that we are at various stages of regulatory framework development. And then there is a difference in terms of regulatory of digital economic development and consumer rights. Like I indicated, we have Kenya with the highest number of metrics. And then there are different approaches that are being used to various issues. All those issues are a result of not having a coherent regional approach. So in terms of now regulation for connectivity, what exactly can we do to ensure that we regulate? Maybe I'll start by giving a background to why we need to regulate. The first issue is actually in terms of market liberalization. We have, I think, one country where there is still only one player in the ICT industry, which in itself is stifling in terms of competition. It means that there is no competition, so there is actually no incentive for a lot of things, and consumer protection and related issues might actually be overlooked because we have no option and we have no choice. There is only one option. So, and then there is the issue of introduction of competition, consumer protection and rights, standardization and type approval of equipment, which is key to connectivity, and regional integration. And there's also the issue of benchmarking. So in terms of regulatory frameworks and policies which can be adopted, maybe I'll first take us back to the Global Symposium for Regulators, which was held last year. This is one of ITU's benchmark conferences. One of the issues that came there, or the major theme, was to regulate for impact. So what this tells us is that regulation is key to ensuring that there is a connectivity and also for the continuity of the digital ecosystem. But then regulation has evolved over the years as the market and the industry and technology has also evolved. So, and then in terms of the ITU 2023 to 2024 to 2027 strategy, it is focusing on universal meaningful connectivity and sustainable digital transformation. In terms of connectivity, universal meaningful connectivity is one of the major issues that as a region we're working on under our regional initiatives, where we want to ensure that each and every African country has the adequate infrastructure to ensure that they are the population is connected. So those are some of the regulatory framework and policies that we're going to look at. So in terms of the first recommendation, or first approach that I would want to recommend is use of unified licensing framework and simplified licensing. Some countries within the region have actually already started implementing a unified licensing framework. So what this means is that a player just gets one license, which will allow them to offer all the various services that they can offer. We still have some countries which are where the licensing framework is different, where you need to get license per service. This is stifling because what it means is as the industry changes and as technology changes, there might be need to review these licensing, the license that an operator has. So it actually discourages operators. So a unified licensing framework allows an operator to get a license once and for all, which they can use to deliver various ICT service. And also simplifying the procedures for licensing helps to ensure that new players can easily obtain licenses and enter the industry. So it reduces the barriers to entry into the ICT industry. And then we look at regulatory sandboxes. Regulatory sandboxes are something that is currently being encouraged a lot all over the world. This is because of the rate at which technology is changing. So a sandbox is sort of like an experimental approach to regulation, where a regulator can put certain parameters and conditions for the use of a certain service over a trial period, whilst they try to determine in terms of how the technology works, the best way to actually regulate and what it means in terms of the sector. So whilst they're doing this, the new technology can actually be implemented, whilst at the same time, we are also building the regulatory capacity to understand how best to deal with the new technology. Maybe I can give examples in terms of Starlink, which is relatively new to most countries. We had issues across maybe Africa as a whole, where some countries easily adopted Starlink, some could not because they could not understand it in terms of regulation. So something like a regulatory sandbox can actually be used by a country for a trial period or for a certain period of time while they try to understand how best to regulate that technology. And then technology neutrality and spectrum management. It is important that the licensing framework or the regulatory framework allows for technology neutrality. Previously, some countries have issued maybe licenses for GSM or something like that. And then as technology evolves, we've seen that maybe this has become redundant or it has become a hindrance in terms of development of the market. And then there's the issue of spectrum management. Various spectrum management policies have a different effects in terms of connectivity. So this depends, this depends on the country's aim in terms of spectrum usage, and that is, and also in terms of adapting to change. You find that as new technologies come, there are different requirements and new requirements in terms of spectrum, which might not have been foreseen initially when licenses were issued out. So it is important that we adopt forward-looking spectrum management policies, which will allow for technology changes to be adapted without disturbing how the industry is working. And then there's the issue of infrastructure sharing. We cannot overemphasize this. It has been talked about in the morning, and it's still something that we're still going to say. So spectrum infrastructure sharing can be at different levels, from physical infrastructure to dark fiber to even active equipment, such as maybe MORAN setups and so forth. So this is still very important that regulators consider such when they come up with regulatory frameworks, to make sure that there is incentive, or even at times to make sure that it is mandatory for players to share infrastructure, so that they reduce the cost of connectivity, and also encourage players to build infrastructure in new areas which had not been built before. And then we have universal access services and tax incentives. It is also important to have such legislation and regulation to allow for UAS. And this can come in terms of universal service obligation, where on issuance of a license, you might give an operator targets in terms of what they should have achieved in terms of, maybe say after 5 years, you should have coverage in the major cities and also in certain small towns and small rural areas as part of the licensing agreement. And then we can also have universal service funds, and a lot of other innovative approaches can be used here to ensure that there is connectivity in those underserved and marginalized areas which normally would be left out. And then multi-sector regulation. Multi-sector regulation is something that is that has already gained momentum in the developed world, where regulation is not focused to one industry like ICT, but you can have maybe regulation of all infrastructure facilities under the same roof. So this will mean that when you are implementing the electricity, maybe backbone, you also use that same backbone to build your fiber infrastructure. You also maybe use railroads, the water infrastructure for various other services which would need to be planned at the same time. This reduces the cost of planning and the cost of rollout for all concerned. There are some challenges with this approach in terms of the technical skills required, and also agreeing and coming to a common understanding of how various services can all be implemented at once. But it has shown that there are advantages to actually adapting such an approach. And then the other regulatory issues which need to be taken into consideration, it's public-private partnerships in terms of how the regulatory and the legal frameworks allow for this to come in. You find that in terms of the region, this is one of those components that is lacking for some countries. There is very limited investment from the private sector. it is important that we encourage the investment from private sector. And then there's also the need for agile regulation. This is to say that regulators should always be on the lookout and understand the trends that are happening in the industry so that they can quickly adapt to the changes and ensure that countries do not lag behind because regulation and policy are taking forever. Yes, it is true that the rate of technology development will always outpace regulatory changes, but we also need to be more agile. And then there is an issue of harmonization of regional policies. Like I indicated before, we don't have a regional regulatory association for the whole sub-region. This would help in ensuring that we have model laws and guidelines that can be used and adapted by each country to ensure that once we need to integrate infrastructure in all the countries, we are using the same standard and we have the same understanding of what needs to be done. And then we also have the issue that I indicated before, issues like internet exchange points. I believe that regulation should actually look at these issues because they reduce the cost of connectivity at country and regional level. So it is important that they be taken into consideration. Other new developments like community networks, we have seen a lot of countries now they are adopting this for last mile connectivity and to ensure that the the cost of connectivity for marginalized communities is reduced. But a lot of countries, they do not have regulations which will ensure that community networks can thrive. Because most of the times, a community network might not be able to compete at par with an ISP or a commercial network. But they need to be protected because they're essential to ensuring that connectivity gets to those marginalized areas. And then there's also issue of last mile connectivity. We always need to take this into account in terms of the technologies. The regulatory frameworks need to be made in such a way that they ensure the efficient utilization and reutilization of spectrum in the last mile to ensure that this scarce resource is actually used by everyone as required. And then, so in conclusion, I can say that the region has many challenges, and these challenges can actually be overcome if we come together and look for innovative ways that will ensure that we build the infrastructure that is required. And there are still many more strategies that we could explore together individually as countries and at regional level, which can actually help in ensuring that we get universal and meaningful connectivity, not just connectivity for the sake of connectivity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Mavis. So there won't be any Q&A in this part of the session. There will be a Q&A panel later in the next part. So you can put all your questions at that panel. So next is Dr. Milian. Milian Hailemichael, Deputy Director General ECA. Mr. Milian Hailemichael is a seasoned expert in information technology and telecommunication law with over 15 years of experience in policy, strategy, and regulatory affairs. He holds a Master of Science in IT and telecommunication law from the University of Southampton, UK, and a Master of Laws from Aramaya University. He specializes in telecommunication law, internet regulation, personal data protection, cybersecurity law, and internet governance. His work drives innovation and policy excellence in the digital space. So please welcome Mr. Milian to the stage.
Thank you, Robel, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rhian Hailemichael. I'm Deputy Director General of Ethiopian Communication Authority. So today I'm going to give you a short briefing on regulation governing connectivities in Ethiopia. So I have actually 4 topics to address today. The first one is, the overview and the key component of connectivities in Ethiopia, and then I will try to assess current connectivity landscape in Ethiopia. And the third part, just I will dwell on regulatory frameworks governing or enhancing connectivities in Ethiopia. And finally, just I will talk about the challenges that face connectivities in Ethiopia. To start with, the government of Ethiopia aims to provide a full range of communication services to all the population, regardless of their geographical location and social economic status, and other attributions. So the government aims to provide, affordable and quality services to its citizens, whether they are, economically capable, or whether they are living in the rural areas or in the cities. The government aims to provide quality service with affordable prices. To achieve this end, the government has actually introduced liberalization in Ethiopia. The introduction of telecom liberalization in Ethiopia enhanced connectivities. Actually, to clearly understand, what this liberalization has brought, it's better just to see some figures, from the operators. Before the introduction of liberalization, that means in the year 2021, the number of subscriber or telecom subscriber in Ethiopia was 64 million. But after the introduction of, this liberalization, the market is open to the private sector, and the number of telecom user or subscriber has increased, to 81 million. It's just within the matter of 3 years, the number of the telecom subscriber has increased. If we see the mobile internet user, it increased, from 21 million to 45 million. So it's just almost double. The number of internet user was around 21 million in the year 2021. But in the year 2024, this is the figure taken from actually from 2024 June, it becomes 45. Even if we look the fixed broadband user, actually the number of fixed broadband user was almost 487,000. But now it becomes like, 747. So the mobile subscriber penetration has become now 74%. The mobile internet penetration has become 41%. So, and if we see even the internet, the international gateway capacity, if we see ET alone, it has the capacity of 1.8 terabyte per second. If we look the new entrant Safaricom Ethiopia, it has 120 GB per second. Actually, there is also a progress in terms of telecom tower. Before the introduction of this liberalization, the number of telecom tower in Ethiopia was around 7,000. But last year, June, the number of tower has become, 11,500. There is an increase of 4,400 towers, or there is an increase of 62%. If we look even the fiber line, in the year 2021, it was around 21,000 kilometers, but now it becomes 32,000 kilometers. So, the introduction of telecom liberalization in Ethiopia has enhanced connectivities. So the legal and regulatory framework of the telecommunication sector has a direct correlation with enhancement of connectivity in Ethiopia. When the market is open for the private sector, actually, the nation was trying to craft, new laws, new policies, and new legal and regulatory frameworks. So this legal and regulatory framework has a direct correlation or in relationship with the connectivity in the country. So here actually we have like 15 or 16 legal and regulatory frameworks, but here just I will try to access or to look, some of the legal framework that has, a close relationship with the enhancement of connectivity in the country. The first legal instrument is the Communication Service Proclamation number 1148. 2019. This is a proclamation which liberalized the telecom market in Ethiopia. If we look at Article 19 of this proclamation, it opens a door, for the private sector to engage in telecom sector. So this proclamation can be taken as a policy document even because it gives, a direction for the private sector, to engage on the telecom sector and enhance connectivities. The other legal framework which has an influence on the enhancement of connectivity in Ethiopia is the Telecommunication Licensing Directive. This is the directive which governs, the whole regime of licensing or telecom licensing in Ethiopia. It has expanded license types. Actually, before the enactment of this directive, we had only limited license types, but with the introduction of this directive, we were just able to expand the license category. So this directive has generally categorized, licenses into two parts: individual license and class license. Individual license is it's a kind of license which is issued to an entity on the basis of competition or bid. And we have actually two kinds of license under individual license, that is Unified Telecom License and IXP. Under class license, we have actually 11 or 12 types of licenses. So we have issued, almost thousands of licenses under on the basis of this directive. Actually, if we see the Unified Telecommunication License in Ethiopia, we can find, terms and conditions that govern, the telecom operators. So in these terms and conditions, the telecom operator has a coverage obligation. So actually, this is a kind of license which is given to the telecom operators in Ethiopia. We have two operators now. So these two operators has a coverage obligation. This obligation can be identified as population coverage and geographical coverage. Population coverage, it refers to the service that operators provide to the population who live in specified areas. Geographical coverage is it's a kind of it refers to the area that the operator, provides services. So on the basis of these two coverage obligation, the regulator has set a clear and measurable target for the telecom operators. So this obligation has been measured, annually. For instance, if we see actually the achievement of the new entrant in Ethiopia, in relation to this obligation, Safaricom, when it comes to the market, actually, it was 3 years ago, we have given them a coverage obligation was in terms of population and geographical coverage. For instance, in terms of population coverage, we have given them a target of 40% to cover in 2 years. So they achieved, voice and text coverage, 42%. If we look, the broadband internet, they are able to cover 40% of the population, within 2 years. If we see the geographical coverage, actually, we have classified this coverage into highways, major road, airport, economic zone, blah, blah. So geographical, if we see the highway, we have given them the target of 50%, that they are able to achieve voice and text 52% and voice. So they are able to cover, 52% for voice and text, and they are able to cover, 50% for broadband. If we see the airport, actually, we have given them the target of 75% to cover in 2 years. They are able to cover almost 92%. At the end of the 2 years. If we see the special economic zone like industrial zone and industrial park, we have given them 100% target and they fulfill this requirement. They cover 100% of the industrial and ICT parks. The other, actually, they have been given, the obligation to cover large, medium, and small cities. So within 2 years, they are able to cover 446 towns in Ethiopia. Even we have given them zonal coverage. The target was 35, but they are able to cover, 55 zones within 2 years. This is actually related to our licensing directive, and the other legal and regulatory framework, which is clearly related to the expansion of connectivity in Ethiopia, is the Universal Service Regulation. This regulation, as you see, is a draft regulation. A public consultation has been made, regarding this consultation. We have received actually input from local and international stakeholders. Now, this draft proclamation or the regulation is on the hand of Council of Ministers. We are expecting this regulation to be adopted very soon. So, in this regulation, actually, we have set the objective. So, there is the Universal Access Fund. So this Universal Access Fund will be used to give services to the rural areas that are either unserved or underserved, to low population density area where provisional service is not commercially viable for operators, and we will give support, to the people even living in the large cities, but to the poor people living in the large metropolitan cities. We have also planned to use this money to provide better connectivity to school, hospital, clinics, and libraries. So, actually, even if it's a draft regulation, we are expected, to adopt very soon. So, we are planning, to make it operational in the coming June or July. The first of the fund is and a donation collected from communication service provider and international organization. The amount of the levy is like 1.5% of the total annual income. So by collecting this fund from the communication service provider and from the international donor that will expand connectivities in Ethiopia, the money will be distributed through the next auction. So, actually, with regard to, we have prepared fund utilization plan for the Universal Access Fund. We have actually 2 plans or we have developed 2 phases, to utilize this fund. Primary objective is to extend communication infrastructure and service to underserved areas. The moment we get this fund, we will use it to extend this communication, we will use it to extend communication infrastructure and service to underserved areas. And 2, we will just ensure any quality of services for area covered by universal services program. And 3rd, we will promote the availability of services of using the Universal Access Fund. second phase is, we are planning to use this money to support the expansion of ICTs and e-services for school, houses, facilities, and public organization. We also aim to enhance ICT skills, capacity building, and addressing skill gaps. We have also actually a plan to develop, local content. Local content is very important, especially to bridge the gap of, digital literacy in Ethiopia. So we have a plan, to develop local content. A special project, especially that's coming from non-governmental organization like Community Network. So if we say this much regarding universal service, what is the status of universal access fund in Ethiopia? As I said before, we don't start actually collecting this money yet, but we have get a small support from the World Bank. So through this support, we are planning a major borderland project in refugee camp areas. So we have a plan actually to use this money to enhance connectivity in refugee camp areas. And we have also get, a support from JICA to provide broadband network access and digital skill training to TVET institution. So these two projects can be taken as a pilot project for Ethiopian Communication Authority. The other, actually, we have also other legal and regulatory frameworks, which is closely related to connectivity. This is Communication Service and Regulatory Fee Directive. This is actually one of the directives which determine the price of spectrum in Ethiopia. As you know, if the price of the spectrum is so high, operators or service provider will not be interested to extend services to the rural area. So when we determine this fee, actually, we have taken into account innovation and expansion of connectivities in Ethiopia. So our spectrum fee or our spectrum price is relatively, low. So this directive is very important in ensuring, connectivities in Ethiopia. The other directive is infrastructure sharing and collocation directive. This directive helps, the new entrant to share infrastructure with the incumbent operator. So it has actually a cumulative outcome of extending, internet and internet connectivity in Ethiopia. So according to this directive, the incumbent operator has an obligation actually to lease or to share its infrastructure to the new entrants. Actually, they already shared infrastructure in Ethiopia. So it has a direct implication on extending connectivity in Ethiopia. And the other one is the telecommunication interconnection directive and roaming. We have this legal framework as well. It plays, a crucial role in extending connectivity in Ethiopia. I think this is some of the legal framework we have in Ethiopia. But, when we come to the last part of this presentation, we just find the challenges to connectivities. We have been trying to expand, connectivities in Ethiopia, but we have also encountered some problem. One of the major problems in Ethiopia is lack of road accessibilities. In Ethiopia is a very mountainous country. Sometimes the service providers are required, to bring these heavy towers to mountainous areas. So this is a challenge actually in Ethiopia. And second is the lack of power, especially in the rural areas. Sometimes the operator is interested, to extend networks in the rural area, but in that specific area, there may not be, enough power, so that discourage them, to extend their services. Actually, in some places, the operator went and established their network, but their operational cost is so high. So this can be taken as a challenge, and there is a lack of digital literacy in Ethiopia. In some places where there is, enough connectivity, people may not utilize, this infrastructure very well because of, lack of digital skill or digital literacy. So this is actually the challenge we have been facing so far. So in order to solve this problem, actually, we have been engaging with different government institutions. So we believe that, this problem will be alleviated in the coming time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Milian. The next presentation would be done by Mr. Barrack Otieno. Mr. Barrack is a management information system specialist with over 20 years of experience. Is a leader in the internet infrastructure governance and policy development. As general manager of the African top-level domains organization, he has advanced technical reforms, supported DNSSEC program, and played a key role in the Africa domain delegation. He leads the Kenya School of Internet Governance and chairs the Association of Community Networks in Kenya. Mr. Barrack also serves as CTO of Abrint, providing connectivity to over 30,000 community members in Western Kenya. And he has held leadership roles in ICANN and the Internet Society Kenya chapter, advocating for digital inclusion and sustainable internet growth in Africa. Please welcome Mr. Barrack to the stage.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I hope we are not getting into safe mode after the sumptuous lunch. Yeah, so I'll go straight to the presentation following the two great speakers. I hope we can pull up my presentation so that I proceed without any further ado. The previous speakers have ably set the scene for what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to focus on community networks, which have been mentioned as a complementary access model, and I hope to enhance our understanding of the same, and also just share the Kenyan experience. All right, thank you. Yeah, so I wear many hats as has been presented, and my desire is to ensure that the internet is for everyone. So sometimes you go this way and find a roadblock that blocks that aspiration, and we try get workarounds through various initiatives. So my presentation will cover the areas that are indicated on the screen. What is a community network? I know that's a potential question that could be ringing in most of our minds. I'll also touch on community networks as tools. I'll touch a bit on the journey of community networks in Africa. I'll talk about actors in community networks, especially regulatory agencies. I'll share the case study from Kenya. I'll also share some of the key initiatives that are revolutionizing the regulatory landscape in Kenya, and some proposed best practices that IGAD and Horn of Africa countries can consider. It's interesting that most of us are interrelated or brothers. So what happens in one country affects the other. I like overlanding or traveling, and I'm part of a group that occasionally comes into Ethiopia or goes across into the other African countries. And the constant issue is connectivity, because most of the people who travel work from home or work from wherever, and they connectivity. As I talk about community networks, let me also at the Internet Society. I'm one of the facilitators. We've just opened the call for a new cohort, and whatever I'm going to speak about, if you want further engagement, I kindly request that we meet in those spaces, the Internet Society courses. I'll talk about the courses at the end. We can have greater engagement. I'm passionate about this subject, so if we meet there, we'll be able to discuss more how it can benefit you. But loosely defined, a community network refers to telecommunication infrastructure designed by the community to address communication issues that are relevant to a particular community. Now, in Kenya, we've had a challenge because we have traditional ISPs that exist. Just like other Commonwealth countries, we have tier one license, tier 2 license, and a tier 3 license. Of course, a tier 1 license is given to the mobile network operator, a tier 2 license to gateways, a tier 3 license to those that build network facilities or network facility providers, and those that sell internet or application service provider. Now we are having a tier 4 license, and which is being proposed. Actually, the discussion is supposed to end tomorrow. So in the afternoon, I will be trying to put together my comments so that we can be able to submit the same to the Communications Authority. While at that, I want to salute the Communications Authority of Kenya to hear the Deputy Director from the Communications Authority of Ethiopia reaching out to the community. And my challenge is, when the door is opened, please reach out and support. We are in an era of multi-stakeholderism. So for us in Kenya, the Communications Authority has opened the door for us and supported us to be able to address some of the gaps that we have talked about in communication. Community networks provide users the only way to access the internet in many cases in those unserved and underserved areas. They are generally focused on end user needs. They also build deeper knowledge on ICTs, and they help to localize income. It's interesting to pay attention to the internet economy. I'm also in the world of domains, and I always say, if you buy a .et, you keep the money in Ethiopia, isn't it? Who operates .et? It's Ethio Telecom, yeah? If you buy a .com, probably the money goes somewhere else. So it's also good that as we talk about connectivity, we understand the economics around the internet. Something interesting about community networks is that it is they help us to live the reality of our communities. My experience deploying community networks is you can connect a home and they will pay you after 2 months. Or sometimes they don't have cash to pay you. They will look for another way of paying you. You know, our communities have barter trade, isn't it? In exchange for connectivity. And that's the spirit of what we call Ubuntu in Africa. As we talk about community networks, it's also important to pay attention to the actors. There are 3 main actors in community networks. We have the micro, we have the meso, and we have the macro actors. This is why I said that we need to meet in that community networks class. The micro actors refers to the community where the community network operates. For instance, I learned yesterday that we are in Bole, isn't it? Bole is a particular community that is probably different from the other one I know, I think is Bishoftu. That is probably very different from Bishoftu, isn't it? You may find that the income levels in Bole are very different from the income levels in Bishoftu. So if you are connecting people in Bole and Bishoftu, the people in Bole might easily pay you cash. They might easily pay you with mobile money, but it might not be the same case with Bishoftu or another town that is far away. The second major actor is the meso actor. This is the actor that functions as a catalyst and or supports the community, usually by bringing knowledge, skills, expertise, or partnerships to the community. So it could be the Internet Society of Ethiopia, for example, or it could be an NGO that has the expertise and skills that is bringing connectivity in that particular area. Then we have the macro level, which is composed of organizations that influence how the community network integrates into the telecom sector. In this case, the regulator in Ethiopia, the previous speaker who was before me, that's a macro actor. They will determine if you will participate or if you won't participate. If they call you an illegal operator, you will not operate. If they allow you, you will operate. Governance is a critical component of community networks, and I have mentioned the role of the regulator. The regulator is key because community networks rely on spectrum, and spectrum is a highly regulated resource. Remember, the airlines use spectrum, the ships use spectrum. We use spectrum for radio and for various telecommunication reasons. So it's a very important resource that needs to be managed. Community networks rely on the unlicensed spectrum, basically referred to as the industrial, scientific, and medical band, normally the 2.4 and 5.8 gigahertz band. Many countries treat unlicensed spectrum differently. There have been efforts to also open up spectrum bands like 6G. In Kenya, if you try to set up a network on 5G, you encounter a lot of noise. Now we can no longer use 2.4 because there are a lot of devices out there. And this is the reason why the regulator is a critical player in this community network conversation. Having said that, there are many challenges that come with deployment of community networks. Number one, there is varied understanding. In many countries, based on level of engagement between the different actors, there are varied understanding on what a community network is and what a community network is not. Sometimes you may find that an area, just the way when you build some through a community area, you don't see businesses popping up or popping up. Sometimes a community network can start in an underserved area or in a sub area, and it can be nondescript. Then that area starts developing for whatever reason, and then you find that it's now competing with some of the biggest operators in the land. And the question then starts being asked on, is this a community network or is this a commercial entity? There is that tension. On the other hand, remember community networks provide connectivity. Connectivity comes at a cost. In the past, there was the feeling that community networks should not charge. But at the end of the day, the main service providers that provide community networks with connectivity need the money to survive. Yes, I can see Professor Kashoda laughing. He has supported some community networks in our country. And the worst thing is when you're unable to pay your bills at the end of the month as a community network. That's another conversation that needs to be had. The other issue is assessing whether a community network will benefit from and be able, whether a community will benefit from and be able to sustain a community network. The other issue is planning the construction of a community network. In Kenya, the Communication Authority, the ICT Authority expects the same standards that mainstream operators use in building networks to be applied by community networks. Because remember, you're connecting hospitals, real lives. So it's not an experiment. If you decide that you're going to do it, then you have to do it right. So even though we talk about community networks from a research and development perspective, the expectation is that they will address real-life solutions or challenges. I see my time is almost up and I'm just starting. I thought I had 25 minutes. But I stand guided. At what point? 15 minutes. Thank you very much. Let's look at some of the African countries that recognize community networks. Of course, we have Kenya, we have Uganda, and we have Lesotho, which have enacted acts at different levels that recognize community networks. And it's my hope, just as the Deputy Director has indicated, that Ethiopia will also join the bandwagon and many other countries. I will touch a bit on the journey of community networks in Africa. It's interesting that this may not be a very new subject, but the first summit on community networks, I recall, was held on 22nd November 2016 at the University of Nairobi. I recall Dr. Dawit was there championing for it, the way he's doing it here. Prior to that conference, a survey identified 37 community network initiatives in 12 African countries. 25 initiatives were considered active at that particular time. The number is increasing. There are quite a number of presentations, which I will not touch on at this time. But in Kenya, after that particular conference, we had the Tunapanda Community Network that was launched in Kibra. And during the Africa Internet Summit in 2018, the community, those who participated in the community attended a session on community networks and actually went and assisted in the deployment of the Tunapanda Community Network. We also had the Lanet Umoja Community Network that was deployed under the stewardship of AFCHICS. And after that, in 2020, we had a Heri Community Network that I helped to initiate in Kisumu along the lakeshore, along Lake Victoria. Having said that, currently we have about 20 community network initiatives in Kenya, and I believe by the end of this year, we will have over 50 community networks. We have an association that I have the privilege to chair, and we expect that our focus this year is going on ensuring that the community networks actually comply to the Communications Authority of Kenya guidelines or requirements. We have held a School of Community Networks, which was hosted in Kisumu in March 2022. We also had a National Summit of Community Networks last year, supported by the Communications Authority of Kenya. And this is what has spurred or inspired the numbers of community networks to grow. So typically, when you look at how a community network operates, in as much as when it comes to connectivity, return on investment is a key requirement. Community networks seek to ensure that the community is actually able to utilize the internet and digital services meaningfully. I'll come back to that as we move along. I will skip the journey for community networks in Africa, but we've had a number of initiatives largely championed by the Internet Society and the Association of Progressive Communications to build the body of community networks in Africa. And there's a map of community networks in Africa if you visit apc.org. I will skip straight to the case study on the development of regulatory frameworks for community networks in Kenya, and then I'll come back to address some components of my discussion in the presentation later. Currently, there's a widespread review of the telecommunication regulatory framework in Kenya to make it current and relevant. From 2023, the Minister of ICT in Kenya actually created an ICT sector working group to review key media and communication laws in the country. The motivation was the need for the laws and policies to be updated to incorporate emerging technologies such as AI and big data. We have been relying on the Kenya Information and Communications Act, which was enacted in 1998. And so you can imagine why we need to change it, or why there's a feeling that we should change it. But it has been working for us. And I think it is the tool that has been at the forefront of the progressive activities that, of the progressive development that we have had. While at that, the government of Kenya has prioritized the digital superhighway as its flagship project. I don't work for the government, for the record, but I'm going to clarify where, as community networks, we have been impacted by some of these tools. So the digital superhighway comprises 100,000 kilometers of fiber optic cable. Government, I believe, will implement 52% of this, while the private sector, academia, and other actors will implement 48%. So we have, for instance, the National Research and Education Network. Professor Kashoda will be speaking later, which is also playing a major role, similar to what the community networks are doing. But KNET has been in existence for a long time, and it is actually supporting some of the community networks as a backhaul service provider. The other objective that the government wants to achieve is to deploy 25,000 hotspots across the country. And as community networks, we have sat with the government and different government agencies and pledged our share of these particular hotspots. So how do the community networks deploy them? Most of the community networks work with development partners. For instance, in Kenya, we have worked very closely with the Internet Society Kenyan chapter, with the Internet Society Foundation, and I'm happy to report that over 80% of the community networks have been built with the support of the Internet Society. Most of these activities that we are talking about have actually been achieved with the support of the Internet Society. And I believe that the chapter in Ethiopia can also be able to achieve this. It is worth noting that we currently have over 5,000 government services that are online in Kenya, which has necessitated more complementary access methods or more complementary access models. Previously, when the Deputy Director General was presenting, he talked about the geographic obligations, and you find that most service providers will focus on areas that are profitable. Probably they will focus on Addis Ababa, or probably they will focus on Bole, probably they will focus on Nairobi because there is money. In fact, in Nairobi alone, there are over 100 internet service providers just competing for a share of the 10 million citizens that are there. At the end of the day, it's all about money. But we have parts of the country that are bigger than Nairobi, yet they have no service provider. In fact, when it comes even to telecommunication, I have heard, let me be politically correct, that in some places, service providers switch off base stations because it costs them a lot to operate them in areas where there is no return on investment. Most of them rely on average revenue per user. But what happens to the people that are in those areas? Most of them are our relatives. Most of us in Africa, you have a home in the city and you have a relative in the village. Woe unto you when your job ends. That's when you realize that life is hard in the village, isn't it? Because you relocate with your laptop and then it is useless because you cannot connect to the internet. And this is why community networks are important. So because of the 5,000 government services that are online, it doesn't matter if you are a Kenyan citizen who is in Mandera and another person who is in Nairobi. If you need a government service, you need to go online. The difference is the person who is in Nairobi has quicker and easier access to the internet than the person who is in Mandera. We had an interesting scenario yesterday when we came in, when we were asked to fill in some health forms at the airport. And all of us started sweating. I was so glad there was no one on the line, but I ended up taking, I don't know, 20 minutes or something just to fill in that form. And I was really complaining. We were with Professor Kashod. I said, at least they've made it easier for data to be collected. But I was telling him, I wish I was filling a form, a paper form. I would have left this place already. You can see I was already frustrated because of connectivity. I'm saying that on a light note. There's always room for improvement. Some of the key initiatives that have revolutionized the regulatory landscape in Kenya, and I've listed them. Number one, I will start by mentioning that the government has acted as a catalyst for the legal and regulatory reforms in Kenya. With all due respect, I have to acknowledge what past and present governments have done, and I think it should be the same case for other African countries. Governments are critical when it comes to connectivity. Development partners such as the UK Aid, GIZ, USAID, the World Bank have also supported systemic interventions aimed at, number one, promoting diversity, number two, equity, and number three, inclusivity in the community network space. Since December, I have been involved in a project that is supported by the UK Aid to train about 10 million citizens on basic digital skills in Kenya. And I was involved from development of the curriculum, and right now there's actually training that is taking place on a mass scale. All right, on a mass scale. I've been allotted to wind up. Let me just finish with this slide. Again, there's been a lot of review of the licensing frameworks. We have the Community Network Service Provider license that I've talked about. Currently, we also have a Tier 4 license, which is a new license, and the whole objective is to lower the cost of licensing to allow local players to actually participate in the local community networks ecosystem. The current Tier 4 license follows a study that was conducted last year, spearheaded by the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance with the support of UK Aid to ensure that licenses are affordable and within the reach of local communities. There's also been a focus on data protection, which has been championed by the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. So as I conclude, some of the proposals that I would encourage IGAD countries to consider are focus or encouragement of government as a catalyst for regulatory reforms, multi-stakeholderism as a key pillar for regulatory reforms. There are many solutions within government, private sector, civil society, academia, and the technical community that can solve the challenges that we face. Investment in research and development to facilitate development of locally relevant solutions. Most of the developments that I've talked about in Kenya have emanated from the university ecosystem. Research and educational networks play a critical role as a catalyst in this space, and of course, private sector invests. Non-governmental organizations are key in ensuring that there is digital literacy. Investment in capacity building and capacity development is critical. ISOC, I've mentioned, is providing a platform with many of these courses. Infrastructure sharing and cloud facilities should also be encouraged to lower the cost of connectivities at the last mile. One of the greatest costs that community networks face is actually backhauling between the cities and the rural areas. And we've seen that data centers can significantly lower this cost by ensuring that the connectivity is accessible locally. And lastly, I indicated that decentralization of the data centers will be key in enhancing last mile access. Allow me to stop at that. In the interest of time, I will be back during the panel. Thank you for your attention.
Right. It's always great to hear experiences from other countries' community network space, so thank you. So the last session, or the last speaker would be Mr. Rhian Duarte. After this, there will be a 10-minute coffee break. So feel free to go outside and make some coffees. So Mr. Rhian Duarte is a senior manager for public affairs at Abrint, a Brazilian association of internet service providers. He has over a decade of experience in policy and government affairs. At Abrint, she fosters dialogue and collaboration with the Brazilian government, Congress, industry, civil society, and international stakeholders. Previously, Rhian worked as a consultant specialization in tech and telecom, and holds degrees in political science and business management with a focus technology and innovation policy. So welcome, Mr. Rhian.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well? Good morning from Brazil, and good afternoon to all of those present. I'm very sorry I could not be there in person this time, and I really hope to join you in person in future editions of this conference. And I really like to thank you, Internet Society, for this invitation. I will be sharing my presentation. Let me see. I hope you can see it. So again, just in the presentation, my name is Rhian Duarte. I'm a senior manager of public affairs for Abrint, which is the Brazilian Association of Internet Service Providers. And I would like to start this presentation just talking a little bit about who we are. So who is Abrint? We are the largest non-profit organization representing the internet service provider ecosystem in Brazil. Right now we have over 2,000 members, We were established in 2009, and we are present, our members are present all across Brazil. And we hope to bring you some good ideas and showcase the Brazilian fixed broadband ecosystem has a good ideas. We have some good examples of what we can do focused in fixed broadband, and mostly I will not be touching up on community networks. We'll be working on the for-profit companies in Brazil. We are a democratic and open organization. Our leadership is based on volunteer work. So they own their own companies, they work at their companies, and they donate some of their time to Abrint to make sure we are, progressing in a good way with the internet industry in Brazil. I'm part of the local staff, so we are overseen by an 8-member board of directors who oversees our daily activities. In Abrint, we work to advocate for public policy to support small and medium-sized companies and advancing universal and meaningful connectivity in Brazil. So why would we care a little bit more about the case in Brazil? We have shown very good evolution in ICT indicators in the last 20 years. As you can see, we have the number of connected homes grew 6-fold in the last 20 years. We went from 8 million connected homes in 2007 to 53 million just the end of last year. So the percentage of connected homes grew from 27% in 2010 to over 84% in 2024. So we are doing very good work on connecting the country, mostly on fiber and on optical fiber networks. And this is the work of a very decentralized and competitive market. We have over 21,000 internet service providers in Brazil. And most of these providers are small operators. So only 581 ISPs in this 21,000 universe have over 5,000 clients. And if you see, only 7 have over 1 million clients. And that is including the 3 national big telco operators. So we have 3 national players, 4 regional big players, and whole universe of small providers working within their communities, within the municipalities to connect people in Brazil. So you can see here, I'll talk a little bit more about the regulation side, but we split the market into the big telcos, the 3 national operators, and the regional ISPs. So the regional ISPs are the ones driving the expansion of infrastructure in Brazil. These are small companies operating in perhaps 1 or 2 cities most of the time. These small operators, they are usually small companies. They started out as a family company and maybe only attending neighborhoods of their own cities. Then they grew into attending the whole cities. Maybe they expanded to adjacent municipalities. But they have been building this bottom-up connectivity infrastructure in Brazil, mostly with private capital, private investment. And they've been doing great work especially in the last 10 years. As you can see, they grew from 3 million back in 2015 to 32 million connected homes by small operators just last year. And you can see most of this investment was made in small cities. So the big operators, they focused on where it's most lucrative. So they focused on the big cities in Brazil. So over 500,000 inhabitants. So that's where most of their connectivity goes to. While small operators, they're working from the small cities. They started as a business in the small cities. They saw the opportunity to invest in connectivity, and so they did. And that's how we started with this beautiful expansion of fiber networks in Brazil. So we play a very important role. These small companies, as a whole, we hold, as a group, they hold around 60% of the market share, but individually, they are very small companies most of the times. So they have up to 5,000 clients, and they work in their own cities, in their own communities. Usually, the whole city knows who the owner of the ISP is. If they have any problems, they will, reach out on WhatsApp or on the telephone directly to the company owners because they know them. They have a personal relationship with these people, and they've been driving a very important advancement of internet connectivity in Brazil. And this competition is also driving a number of end-use benefits. Not only are people being connected, but the average speeds are going up. The contracted average speeds are going up. Last year, the average contract for a home broadband in Brazil is over 400 megabytes per second. And the prices are also going down. So we have more speed for lower prices at more and more locations. So that's what competition is driving in Brazil. So right now in Brazil, around 65% of the homes are connected on fiber networks, mostly on fiber to the home networks. And most of these new additions have been made by small operators. And frankly, how did we get here? It's a good story of how regulation helped drive market forces. I think Mavis on the first presentation really said regulation is key, and this is true for the Brazilian case. Has the regulator moved away from a command and control regulatory model very much based on monopolies to a more open and focused on competition, reducing the regulatory burden for small operators, reducing barriers to new entries, promoting competition. We really saw the number of small operators rise, the competition rose, and we had many benefits as we talked. So what does this mean really? In Brazil, we are essentially dividing the markets in two groups of companies, those with significant market power, those who can impact directly the competition, and small scale operators. So small scale operators are those with less than 5% of the national market share in any given market. So let's say in fixed telephone lines, in fixed broadband, or in mobile operations. So all these small scale operators, they started out in fixed broadband and fixed landlines, but as they grew, just in a few years ago, in the 5G auction, we had some small scale operators in the first time in Brazilian history, really playing a major role in a spectrum auction for 5G. And we hope that this will be the case moving forward, that we can expand this model of competition towards the mobile operating market as well. But in Brazil, the first initiatives towards this asymmetric regulation started in 2005, so nearly 20 years ago. But the more stronger regulations on this side started really in 2012. That's when you start to see a more significant rise in the number of operators and also in the number of connected homes in Brazil. We started out with a very innovative regulation, which was the General Plan of Competition Targets. In Portuguese, is the BGMC that Anatel provided. The first true concept of what a small-scale operator was. And back in 2012, this a small-scale operator was any operator with less than 50,000 subscribers. We updated that concept in 2018 to the 5% national market rule. But the idea was to, reduce license fees, make it easier for unified license in Brazil. We also created, we digitalized the licensing process. So operators did not need to travel all the way to the capital in Brasilia to get a license. They could do it over the internet. Anatel has also promoted, the regulator has also promoted a lot of education on the company side. They promoted ebooks on how to become an ISPs or what would the steps be to start a new ISP in Brazil. So this all the way back in 2012, that's when we really started to see a very strong movement for the ISPs in Brazil. And also in the last few years, Anatel has created an official committee. It's called the Small Scale Providers Committee, the CPPP in Portuguese, to have a formal committee where regulators and companies sit at the same table to discuss and coordinate regulation. What are the main objectives? What are the main challenges that they are facing? So this is all to say that we have a lot of dialogue between the companies, between small operators and the regulator to make sure that we are moving towards meaningful and universal connectivity in Brazil. And what we say when we mean this asymmetric regulation is that you have a small number of companies that have this significant market power that they can, keep other competitors out of the market. They have an added regulatory burden. They have obligations for providing wholesale access to supporting infrastructure. The regulator actually created an online platform where the big players are obligated to provide
recording in progress,
resale offers on supporting infrastructure. So this means IPs, this means long distance data transit. This can mean, sharing towers and all of this infrastructure. So they are obligated to have a formal offer to any and all operators in the market. This hasn't been a really useful tool yet, mostly because these big companies, they still resist on doing business through this platform. But we have seen a lot of coordination and cooperation between the small scale operators. So they try and share infrastructure, they try and build infrastructure together to reduce costs. And we have seen also a very good advancement in public internet exchange points infrastructure in Brazil, and we are moving together as a community for connectivity. And I think to sum up a bit, we see a lot of the challenges that the previous presenters pointed out. I think as we move towards universal connectivity in Brazil, as we are getting closer to 90 and 100% of homes connected, we can see that the challenges to reach the unconnected, they still unconnected in Brazil, are very similar to what you're seeing in Africa as well. And we really hope to see a bit what you're doing, and maybe we can talk a little bit more. And on the community network, and let's say this complementary connectivity framework, we see the regulator is also moving towards a new regulation specific for community networks. Abrint is also working on capacity building with these community networks to make sure we can work together to reach these unconnected communities. And let's see. Yeah, and going back to points made by Mavis and Million as well, we've seen the impact of reduced license fees, of Anatel has also provided a waive license for really small operators, so operators with less than 5,000 customers. You are not obligated to have a license. Only after you have more than 5,000 customers, you're obligated to go and get your license. We have a reduced fees. So back in 2012, the licensing fees for Brazilian operators would be around 9,000 Brazilian reais. But in 2013, we changed the fees, reduced the fees. So right now you can get a license for 400 reais. So that's a big difference. You can also have unified license, and you have waived licensing obligations for equipment. And Million also touched on the coverage obligations. Brazil does not have coverage obligations attached to its licenses, to the fixed broadband licenses, but we have the coverage obligations attached to spectrum auctions. So whenever you make it a bid and you win the opportunity to explore the spectrum, then you have coverage obligations tied not only to the mobile market, but sometimes also to infrastructure and fixed broadband infrastructure market in Brazil. So thank you for this presentation. I hope I brought some of the Brazilian history to you, and I hope it was informative, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A session.
Thank you, Mr. Rhian. Okay, so a short break, 10 minutes break. There are some coffees just next door, so feel free to grab some tea, restroom break, and we will we'll gather in about 10 minutes, so at 4:10 p.m., and then we'll have some Q&A panel.
Originally, we have around 40 minutes for running out of time. So I apologize, I have to cut short some of the discussion areas. Originally, I wanted to bring some questions from myself and from the ISOC Ethiopia chapter. But in respect for the time, I'll just start with the Q&A from the audience. So if anyone have some questions, please feel free to raise it. In the meantime, I will ask the first question. So this question is goes to Ms. Mavis. So in the earlier presentation, you mentioned the IGAD region have a unified regional regulatory framework or some aspirations toward that. So my question is, how does this unified regulatory framework influence the success of the local internet access or the equitable access within a country in the IGAD region? Like, how does it work, the hierarchy of the IGAD regional framework, the regulation framework versus the local country framework? How do they interact and how does the successful outcome is ensured?
In terms of okay, in terms of the unified licensing framework, this mainly first refers to a country level where you are looking at a unified licensing framework where you are not licensing according to service, but you are just looking at the sector where you're saying telecom service or ICT services. But then at the regional level, basically you want to build synergies to ensure that you have the same understanding and a similar framework so that you can be able to easily integrate and build on synergies in terms of the skills and the capacity that you have to interconnect. And then we talked about some of the key infrastructure that you can consider at regional level, like a regional internet exchange. So when you have a similar or a unified regulatory framework for something like a regional internet exchange, it allows you to build that internet exchange with buy-in from everyone, with a proper understanding of how it will be run, the economies that are associated with that, how it will reduce cost, whether you are selling traffic to each other or you're just peering. And it also gives you an edge internationally because now you're able to negotiate instead of buying internet traffic, you can negotiate for peering. As a region, once you have adequate traffic at regional level, and you are saying, instead of us saying we're buying bandwidth from local international service providers, we are just exchanging traffic. It's an equal, on an equal basis or an equal footing. Thank you very much.
Okay, so it is more of a collaboration of assured success. There is no enforcement of, you have to do this XYZ, and then if the other country regulator doesn't enforce that, then it is more of like a win-win situation, I guess, right? Okay. Is there any other question from? Okay. Yes.
Good evening again. I'm asking this question to all of you, any of you can answer. And the question we've been in the discussion about whether to promote community networks that are not-for-profit kind of operators, or just to promote local operators that are often for-profit organizations that operate almost in the same way. One focuses on the business, while the other one is about building the community. Which way do you think they are complementary with the large numbers of unconnected people in Africa? Which one appears, from the data you have, which one appears to be reaching the unconnected faster?
So this seems to be more regional. So Mr. Barrack.
Thank you, Prof. If I attempt to, your question is interesting, but let me attempt to propose a workable answer based on experience. I think the reality is uniform across Africa. For the last 2 years, I've been training human rights defenders in Kenya. And prior to the training, we normally do a questionnaire to find out where they stand. Normally, we 50 from the 47 counties in Kenya. And when we do a quick survey, what we realize is you'll always find that only about 30% of them can meaningfully utilize the internet and ICTs. And I think when I looked at some of the statistics that were shared here, it seems to collaborate with the number that was presented, 30%. I've listened to GSMA. They also talk about 30% meaningful usage of ICTs in the country, meaning that we have about 70% in the case of Kenya of people that are still unconnected, underserved, or are not connected in a meaningful way. And so you find that, for instance, community networks provide a variety of avenues. In some places, you'll find it has a bureau where people come to charge their phones. After charging their phones, it provides hotspots for them to access connectivity. If they also want to learn, there are 5 or 6 computers where they can go into and be able to learn from there. If you look at a traditional operator, how they operate, they'll come into your house, most likely because you've made an order. Somebody will connect the infrastructure, a contractor. Someone else at the NOC, at the main office, will complete the connection. And they will not engage in any digital literacy. They will not engage in any survey to find out what your issues are. So this is the main difference between community networks and traditional operators. So the other thing is community networks normally employ youth from the local community, largely. You'll find for the main telcos, they will get expertise from all over the world. So you find the expatriates that are working. But a community network, because it doesn't have money, it has to rely on somebody who will walk to work in the local community. So whatever money is generated circulates in the local community, as I presented in my presentation earlier. Where we are moving, I posit, the internet is going to be local. If you look now, in many places, people want to communicate in their local language. That's why I talked about Bole and I talked about Bishoftu. So people want to communicate in a local language. People want meaningful things in their context. They want to do that on the internet. And for that reason, I think it makes sense if the community networks are actually locally owned and supported. Having said that, there's a possibility that a community network can grow. The question is, what is the growth trajectory or what is the growth path? And that's where the regulators actually provide an opportunity for community networks to grow through the tiered model. They may start without money, but if they generate income, or if the community is rich enough, then they can grow into a tier 1 network if they can fulfill the requirements of the regulator. Thank you.
That's a good insight. Let me try to just add one more question on this topic, and then I'll go to the next question from the audience. So speaking of the community network regarding Ethiopia, what has been the experience so far since the regulatory act has been enacted? What have been some of the challenges?
Okay, thank you very much, Robel. With regard to community network, actually, we don't have still a legal and regulatory framework, but we do understand, the importance of having this community network in Ethiopia. They are able to bridge the gap of connectivities in areas, especially where there is no enough connectivities. So we have been doing, the necessary study, especially where this community network will be engaged. So I think we don't have a specific regulatory mechanism to handle, community network. But I don't mean that, community network doesn't have a place in Ethiopia. We understand their role, and we have been just trying, to make them engaging, in Ethiopia. So actually, there has been some sort of initiation in Ethiopia, we know. So we have been trying, to create some sort of opportunities for them just to engage. Actually, one of the reason we delayed, in engaging community network provider in Ethiopia is, the liberalization itself has been made, very recently. We didn't know that, the area where, this community network really engaged. We didn't do, enough gap studies in Ethiopia, so that delayed us. But now we have completed these studies, so I think we will just try to include them in the coming time.
Thank you, Mr. Milian.
Robel, if I may, just to add a bit on the point, I think it was a very good question, and absolutely.
I think we have some points from Mr. Rhian.
Yes, just to point out on the community for-profit, not-for-profit side of the question as well. I think they are absolutely, in the case of Brazil, they are absolutely complementary. And Abrint has been working, trying to get ISPs and community networks to work together more and more in Brazil. I think on the question of speed, of how fast can we connect people, I think maybe this will be much more related to the local, let's say, geography, population density. Perhaps if you have a more dense local or city, a for-profit organization will be faster. But in Brazil, where you have a low density population, community networks have been faster in connecting people. So actually, you need both of them, because when we talk about meaningful and universal connectivity, we do not have one answer to all of our problems. We need to look at different options to arrive at that outcome.
Thank you, Mr. Rhian.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. From the start of the day, we have been talking about how the regional integration can be very much helpful, the infrastructure development, and also the regulations that must be improved in order to give Africa its own content. And Madam, as you said earlier, creating internet exchanges, regional internet exchanges, keeping local content local should be very much appreciated. And I just want to say to Erkan that the main point here is infrastructure. Be it regulation, be it data centers, be it deploying fibers, or these are the infrastructures that we need here. So in order to foster this development, what do you think the role of the data centers for generally for Ethiopia and for the region as a whole? Thank you very much.
That's a good question. So just before I let Mr. Eric answer, I didn't introduce him properly. So Mr. Eric is a group director at Wingu, Africa. So, and I will let him introduce himself in depth after this.
Thank you for the question. So when we talk about infrastructure and data centers, I think they're very synonymous, and how one is codependent on the other. And the benefits of having both of those is, especially carrier neutral data centers, is that it gives an opportunity for carriers to interconnect locally, for an IX to flourish and peer locally, keep traffic locally, saves costs for many of the ISPs rather than having to go out to expensive subsea cables, and it allows local expertise to grow within any segment, in this case Ethiopia. So as this community grows, as more and more services come in, as more caches come in and things are stored, that will improve connectivity. It will help communities as well, because the cost is no longer going out to external parties and coming back in. And also, as I think our Brazilian colleague said, that the more competition there is, the cheaper and the faster the internet becomes for everybody. And in fact, in my experience, and I've worked in Europe, Asia, Africa, and Europe, is the speeds always increase and everybody gets a much larger slice of the pie commercially. So I think data centers and infrastructure very much go hand in hand.
So to add a question on that, where do you see Ethiopia's regulation improvement in the next year or so to make sure that the local content and in relation to the local data center growth?
It's a good question. So I think what we're seeing is there's a much increased demand for cloud services. I think a lot of people want to make that jump, but there's obviously hesitancy, as there is always when the market moves into that area. I think we probably need a little bit more investment, or people taking a leap of faith and bringing some caches and some cloud-based services here. So I mean, it's a little bit chicken and egg, but we will get there. Yeah. So the idea is we incubate the ecosystem so that we touch suppliers with customers and also incubate local talent to be able to provide local services to local cloud providers as well.
Thank you very much. Next question, Mr. Duarte.
I'm David Bakala from Internet Society. My question is mainly to Rhian from Brazil, Abrint. I was very interested by the dysmetric regulation that you mentioned. I don't think that we do have that in many African countries. So I wanted to know how impactful it has been in helping the development of smaller ISPs and how those ISPs have been able to connect maybe the most difficult parts in the country. And maybe most of all, have these ISPs been sustainable? Are they, have they been able to sustain themselves? I think I will stop here for the benefit of time. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Rhian.
Yes, thank you for the question. Starting from the end of the question, yes, the ISPs have been very sustainable. It's a growing market. We have seen in the last few years more banks investing in ISPs, buying and helping, the larger ISPs consolidate and have a stronger structure. The asymmetric regulation has been absolutely key for the development of the ISPs in Brazil for the small operators, mostly because big companies, the national companies have a large burden, especially when you say regulatory burden. So they need big legal offices, they need big accounting offices, and this would simply not be feasible for small operators, operating with 5,000 to 10,000 clients, let's say. So you need a smaller burden. That's not to say that we have any, they do not fulfill their obligations. It's a lower burden, but they still need to comply with consumer obligations, quality obligations. So you try to remove the aspects that are focused on controlling bad habits. Let's say that the regulation is more focused on controlling market abuses. So it's focused on the larger corporations and leaves the ISPs more room to grow and to operate.
Rhian, I have a question for you related to that. So you mentioned the burden that big ISPs have, and I assume the regulator is in a lot of enforcement role at this junction of time. How does the regulator effectively make sure that there is a balance between the monetary or the commercial side of things versus the social responsibilities? For example, if going to a remote area doesn't make sense commercially for a long time, how does it deal with the balance?
That's a great question as well. The regulator, they do within the competition targets plan, the PGMC, they have every 4 years they do a review of the state of competition in every market. So in the mobile, the fixed broadband, and all the services, and they analyze how's the competition doing, how's the market evolving, how the company's faring. So every few years we do a big review of this plan and how we are moving forward. And right now we're in the middle of the current reviewing of the PGMC. So we are seeing all kinds of debates on how much, if we can scale back the symmetries, if we still need it. There's a big debate here in Brazil right now. And what they do is they have let's say a multifaceted approach. They do not only look at services, but they take advantage as well of the spectrum auctions to put in obligations that would help other services, not only the mobile goals. So within the 5G spectrum auction, for example, we had a lot of obligations related to building public infrastructure in the Amazon region, also in fiber networks to help large data centers connect in the Amazon, which will also be very helpful in the future for smaller ISPs in the region as well. So they are taking this multifaceted approach. They look at competition, they review the market, and they also take advantage of the more, let's say, the bigger prices in spectrum to make sure that we are, as a country, we are moving forward in connectivity.
Yep. Okay, next question.
My name is Tasfa from Barrack University. Just a quick question for, I think, Kenya and maybe Brazil. So the type of licensing that we get from the regulator on community networks, especially if you have exemption of licenses on top of those unlicensed spectrum like 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. So maybe if you can reflect on that, and then what is the challenges also you face on those unlicensed spectrums, and how much do you expect to get also license exemption from those commercial ones? Thank you.
Mr. Barrack. Thank you very much. So in Kenya, we have the Community Network Service Provider license, which costs $100 a year. It's different from the Tier 3 Network Facility Provider or Application Service Provider, which combined will cost you anything between $3,000 to $5,000, depending on whether it has been, if you pay late, whether the amount has been, I'm lacking the word. There's a way they can pay depending on the time of the year where you've paid. Something interesting is that the Community Network Service Provider license is only given to not-for-profit entities, a non-governmental organization. It can be a community-based organization. It can be a foundation. It can be a non-governmental organization, but you need endorsement from a chief. I'm not sure if we have chiefs in Ethiopia to confirm that you are actually making a difference in that particular community. This was done as a compromise because there had to be a negotiation with the mainstream operators who are wondering, why is it that someone else is paying $10,000 and another person is paying $100, yet they're providing the same service. The other important thing is that community networks are normally last mile operators. So for instance, Ethio Telecom will be the main provider, but at the last mile, it is the community network that will provide the connectivity and related services. But because some people can be rogue if they are not controlled, Ethio Telecom, the only way it can take action against this community network is by reporting them based on their license to the regulator. So that is how the system operates. So we started with a few pilots which are working with varied success, and we are continuing to try that. I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
Good afternoon. My name is Juno Kal. I'm the Senior Manager at ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. A comment and a question. My comment is towards Assistant Director General at Relations. I think the authority has done really well since it is relatively new. And it's also really good and insightful to see the numbers that you shared in terms of the market being opened and the liberalization of the industry. That was really helpful. And I applaud you and would urge you to keep doing that. It's really good to see the growth, especially in terms of connecting the unconnected. The second question was towards the ITU. You said one of the things that you proposed was a regulator for the region, that we didn't have a regional regulator for the specific, I think, IGAD region. And my question is to just push back a bit on whether we do need another regulator. We already have, ATU, IACO, SADC has one, every country has their own. Sometimes it's even more than one if it's on the internet side, where sometimes they might have the DNS industry regulated separately from the main telco regulator. So just a bit of pushback on whether we do need another regulator.
Okay, thank you for your question. We actually don't need another regulator. My proposal was actually not on a regulator, but on a regional regulatory association, which brings the regulators together so that they are able to come up with recommendations, with guidelines, which guide the region overall. And these guidelines and recommendations, they are not policy and they are not a full regulation, but they are best practices which they agree as a region, which will allow them to integrate their networks to bring together different services in a way that is uniform. and acceptable. So in this case, I indicated that there are two already organizations within the region, IACO, and somewhere within COMESA. But you find that there is no complementarity between the two organizations. And they could also be working on areas which are similar, but differently, such that resources which could be pulled together to push towards a common agenda are actually being split and used separately and differently, which is not efficient and economic for the region.
Okay, thank you. Next question is to Mr. Million. You mentioned a universal access fund that is usually collected during the licensing of the telecom operators, I assume. And that fund is meant to provide funding for projects that would provide connectivity to underserved or rural part of the areas. How does that functionality work? I mentioned, I assume that during your slides, I saw a reverse auction item. How does that actually work? Mr. Mil.
Okay, thank you, Robel. Actually, in my presentation, I have mentioned, Universal Access Fund. This Universal Access Fund has been established by Communication Service Proclamation 1148 in 2019. But, in the proclamation, actually, this fund is only established. The source of the fund and the distribution of the fund is not clearly indicated there. So that's why actually we have tried, to draft a regulation that manages, the source of this income and the distribution of this income. So as I said, actually, the source of this fund is the communication service license holder, including unified telecommunication license holder and other class license holder. They should contribute a certain amount of money to this fund, and this fund will be utilized, to the areas where there is no enough connectivities in Ethiopia. So, we collected this money from the communication service provider itself, and we will distribute this money to the communication service providers in a way of, reverse auction. Actually, reverse auction is a type of auction where the traditional role of buyer and seller are, reversed. In traditional ways, the buyers bidding, for a certain product, whenever there is a bid, a buyer, a bid for a product or service, and seller, compete to offer the price. But in this case, the regulator identified areas where there is no enough connectivity and, set its own requirement to provide connectivity to that particular places. So the communication service provider will come up with their own bid, with their own price, to provide that requirement to the regulator. So, the regulator just will select the bidder which comes up, with the right price or with the lowest price. So this is the way actually we will distribute the money to communication service provider. We collect the money from them and we will distribute this money through reverse auction to communication service providers. So reverse auction is, the regulator set the requirement, and then, the service provider will come up with their own price, to provide or just to build that project. And then the regulator will select based on, the price they provide. So that is actually what we mean reverse auction. So it helps the regulator to get the best price.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Any questions? Okay, there.
Hi, hello, good afternoon. My name is Helena from Liquid Telecom. My question was actually for Rhian, if he's still on. It was a follow-up to what Dr. Duarte asked earlier about the growth of the small tier ISPs. I was particularly fascinated by the, family-owned sort of, who your operator is, you can message them on WhatsApp. I was wondering was it the regulation that opened up opportunity for those ISPs to flourish, or was it sort of a business opportunity that pushed regulation in that direction? It's a sequencing question, I suppose. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, that is a great question. I'm not sure if I have a correct answer, right? I think it can be actually both. I think we had seen some smaller operators before the push in regulation, but definitely has a countrywide phenomenon. Has the regulation allowed these small entrepreneurs to continue to do their business? I think it expanded, and you saw more and more throughout the country, because prior to 2012, you have a lot of bureaucracies to fulfill to actually have a licensed ISP working in Brazil. So what you used to see was many small business starting up as a local computer shop, a local ITC shop, or maybe what we call in Brazil a LAN house, where you could pay to use the internet for a few hours. So they already had some sort of connection to this internet service. So when the regulation opened up the playing field, they saw the opportunity and they invested and started to grow the business in small steps. So they actually started out in a neighborhood, then moved to a city, and so on. So I think I would say that some of them were already operating, and they already had some form of business going on, but has the regulation allowed this possibility to be widespread in the country that we saw this big movement.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Barrack.
Thank you. Just a quick one on the question that was asked. I just wanted to add that the community network service provider license in Kenya is a unified license. It combines the application service provider, which allows you to sell internet or related services, and network facilities provider. Otherwise, as you go up the tiers, you need to apply separately for an NFP and for an ASP. The other quick point that I want to add is that data centers have also played a very critical role in democratizing internet, because the fact that there are meet-me rooms in the data centers have created options, and sometimes most of these operators have ended up creating community players that we have had who are their downstream customers. So one of the things that is critical is having these data centers localized. I know it's a financial issue, but it's very critical. Lastly is the issue of network architecture. We are seeing people having networks even by tribe, because they want content that is in their particular tribe. So you'll find Asians with their own content, Arabs with their own content, and they're paying for it, which means that they make these networks relevant. Thank you.
Interesting. Okay, Mr. Joshua.
Hello, I hope I'm audible. Yeah, I just wanted to add just about 3 points. Earlier there was a question on data centers. I think we need to indeed encourage local data centers, because the data we'll be collecting will be relevant in building AI tools, because you all know that AI depends on data. If you look into the history of this ICT, there was a time the talk was big data, and now the talk is AI, which is based on this big data. So without this local content stored locally, I think we will not be able to build the AI that we want. My second point was on in line with what I think Miss Mavis mentioned on having an association for regulators. And I think this is a very good idea because it's already working in other sectors. Currently, there is an association called the Eastern Southern Africa Water and Sanitation Association, which is doing a lot of work in aligning the management of water and, in fact, regulators of water services in the region. This work goes beyond just talk. They get into understanding indicators and measuring these indicators in a common way so as to be able to serve people who are, say, not accessing clean water. And this is something we could borrow for enabling us to connect more people to the internet. My other point was on something similar to what Mr. Odiambo mentioned. If you look at many of these communities that are hard to reach or that are not connected, they are often border communities, meaning that you actually have cross-border communities that you need to build, a network for cross-border communities. We do have instances around this region whereby at the border, say, of Uganda and Congo, you find on the other side of Congo, they are actually using network operators of Uganda or vis-a-vis. So if you dig further, you will definitely find that these communities are even border communities. And as people here talking, I think we need to work together, not just building communities locally within your country, but perhaps we need to do a collaboration of these communities and connect more people. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua. We are running out of time, but I want to ask one question that I believe is important. I think we can get one question in. So regarding the community networks, I think we have explained a lot about how they work and what are some of the challenges. And one of the challenges that is persistent in all areas of the connectivity paradigm is the backhaul or the long haul piece. And, in relation to the inter-country or inter-regional connectivity, internet gateway, submarine cables, and so on. I understand that the IGAD region is at different stages of the regulatory framework. So my question is to all of you, how does that be improved? Maybe Kenya has gone farther in the journey, Kenya and Brazil, while maybe Ethiopia and South Sudan might not. So how can the regulation help in that case? And then maybe to Ms. Mavis, the inter-country interaction comes out play here, and how can this association of regulatory bodies can help on that regard, specific to the backhaul and the intercontinental or interregional fiber cables? Maybe I start with Mr. Barrack or Mavis or Milian.
Okay, I'll start on the issue of building an inter-regional network. You find that basically it doesn't mean that it has to be a network that is run by one operator. But basically what it means is there has to be an understanding of how we are interconnecting and ensuring that within each country and jurisdiction, we get the required services and speed. So this would start, like you're saying, the networks are hierarchical. So basically, we're looking at the backbone. What backbone should we build for our region? And what does each country need to do in order to come up with this backbone? It might be a process which might take time because our resources might not be readily available for that. So I believe it's a commitment that requires more than just regulators. It also requires the governments and maybe private and public players to come in to help with the investments that are required to build such networks. I could give an example of one company which has done that, but it's not through regulatory efforts, but it's a business model. I think Liquid has managed to do quite a network which runs across many countries, enabling landlocked countries to actually get very good connectivity speeds, because they have designed this network to encompass many many countries, and having many entry points from the submarine cables, they have managed to build the resilience within the network. And I think those are the important aspects: building resilience, building the capacity, and ensuring that there is financial backup from both the public and the private sector to build such a network. So the regional regulatory authority could come in as a harmonizing arm, where they help to ensure that they keep an eye on the developments, keep an eye on the requirements, and continue to work towards that common goal. Thank you.
Sorry, yeah, them jumping very, very quickly here. So I was, funny enough, I think I was the first international employee for Liquid Telecom in London. And when I joined Liquid Telecom, they'd literally just done the connectivity on Bait Bridge, going up towards Harare and Bulawayo. And that was in 2012. And you look where that network went, and the way they did it was through acquisition, and through those acquisition it created competition, and through competition it increased capacities, and in fact it creates an entire ecosystem. Whereas if you know, as I say, when I joined Liquid, I think there was only Zantel and CC Liquid. You look now, you've got MTN, you've got Vodafone, you've got so many suppliers. Same story as we went up into Lubumbashi. We were the only people to break a fiber into Lubumbashi. And let me tell you, that wasn't cheap to buy. But if you look at it now, you've got multiple carriers going in there, and everyone is having a commercial advantage. It's not one person. Everybody is. So local providers, incumbents, as well as commercial enterprises. So I think competition drives growth in capacity, and it actually drives revenues up. But you know, as I said, I've worked in many markets, and there's always a resistance towards this to begin with. And then when they see that 10% of $1 billion is much better than 100% of $1 million, it's it starts to make a lot more sense. And obviously from the data center side, that's exactly what we want to facilitate, is to make sure that customers have got options, and that things are connected, and that the neutrality of a data center, as you say, is very, very important, because it gives an option for carriers to interact with other carriers where they may not have reach. So they buy and sell from each other as well. So it creates a wholesale environment. So just my little bit of experience.
That's a great insight, Mr. Barrack.
Yes, so quickly, regulation can be a burden. And we felt that as community networks and small players, actually, you can pay almost $10,000 on regulation alone, which is very heavy for a small business. So I think self-regulation is good, but self-regulation comes with a lot of education and proper frameworks in existence. So I think that while there's a place for regulation, regulators have a role to be facilitators, whether it's using sandboxes. Number two, the issue of data centers is critical. I cannot overemphasize that, because when we talk about IXPs, which are critical in these regional exchanges, they need to be hosted at data centers. Simple meet-me rooms, they don't cost a lot of money to plug into, but they make a very big difference in reducing the cost of interconnectivity. Lastly, is the issue of infrastructure sharing. It has been a game changer for us in Kenya because many of the telcos carry us on their infrastructure at very affordable rates. You can get data from any company at the data center, IPT or CDNs at a very reasonable cost, and get a carrier or even 2 carriers to help you. So I think those are practices that are going to be a game changer in the IGAD region and in Africa by extension. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Mavis.
Just to add one more thing, which was brought to mind by what he said, to say as Africans, it's high time we learn that within our networks, the competition is no longer really on infrastructure, but it's on service. The end user is not concerned on what kind of infrastructure you are carrying behind you. So it's really important that we just see infrastructure as a path through which we attain the end goal of providing service to the user. So it is important in realizing that we can share this infrastructure, but differentiating at service level to give us the competitive advantage that we want. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone has ideas?
Maybe just something on this issue. So actually, you know, the regulator, even the licensee has a crucial, you know, role in expansion of infrastructure in one country. Actually, if there is no, you know, a proper regulation that will just manage the expansion of infrastructure, you know, things will just stop there. So I think there should be some sort of mechanism that or regulation that boosts, you know, infrastructure in one country. So I think there is a role from the regulator side, especially, you know, in allowing, you know, the private sector to engage more, you know, in this sort of activities. Sometimes, you know, expanding or deploying infrastructure is allowed to the incumbent telecom operator, but you know there should be some sort of changes to this policy. The private sector should engage in building, you know, infrastructure. So I think the regulation will shape up, you know, the expansion of infrastructure just in one countries. This is the point.
Thank you. We have run out of time. So I'd like to thank our panelists, Mr. Barrack, Ms. Mavis, Mr. Milian, Mr. Eric, and then virtually Mr. Joshua and Mr. Rhian. Thank you for the lively Q&A panel.